Okay, I think we're live. It always takes a second to see like how many people are already here in the audience. It always says 0 up in the corner of my screen, but I know there are people in the chat. There we go. Now it says 11. I'm
Oh,
always
yeah.
like, oh, there's no one. Oh, wait, yes, there are people. Yay. So, hello, everybody. Welcome to this Friday workshop on query letters. So we'll chit chat for just a few minutes while we wait for people to sort of roll on in. I mean, since we're here talking about querying, did you query anybody this week?
I did. I'm actually finishing my list. That was kind of my motivation to do it yesterday. Was like, you know what? I have these 2 people left on my list. Let me just do it. I'm a completist, so it's like then there won't be that. Should I do it or not? So I queried that one. I had asked in the James Wade thing about what if the agent wants your full right away? Like it gave me a weird vibe, and he was like, "Do it." So I was like, "Okay."
I saw that for the very first time. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago where somebody just asked for the full along with the query letter. And I personally thought, man, that's awesome because they could come back to me with either a rejection or an offer of representation. Like, why not just cut out that whole middle swath of like back and forth? Like, I was like, I feel like this is very efficient. And if they start reading my first couple pages and they're super interested and they can just keep going, I mean, you don't lose the momentum of, okay, so I read 5 pages. Now let me ask for their thing. And now I have to wait another couple days to get everything in my inbox and, find more time to do it and yada, yada, yada. So I actually didn't think it was weird.
Okay.
So
my first inclination was just like, ew, why do you want that now? But it's like an agent's not trying, a legit agent is not trying to be shady.
Yeah.
And it really just skips that. I think she's an associate agent too. So kind of fingers crossed that maybe she's looking at, has more space on her list maybe. So
let's talk about that at the end. So I think, let's see. We've waited a couple minutes. Our numbers have gone up, ticked up just a little bit. So let's go ahead and do some introductions and then jump right into the material for today. So hello, everybody. I am Abby Mathews. I'm Dabble's community manager in the Storycraft Cafe. Shameless plug, if you found us through YouTube and you would like to come and join our community of writers, you can find us at the Storycraft Cafe. Turn it over.
Hi, I'm Alisa. I write YA fantasy. Have been in the query trenches for a while now, so still fingers crossed. I've got a manuscript out there with an agent, so we'll see what happens, but happy to be here.
Yeah, and I guess that's the piece that I forgot in my introduction. I'm the community manager, but I'm also in the querying trenches. I've followed you, Alisa, as you wrote your book like for a while now, and you've been querying, and you've had more do I want to say like oomph with this? Like I tend to give up on a book real easy and move on to the next one. So I have written 6 middle grade fantasy novels, and I have half-heartedly queried 2 of them, and then decided with this most recent one, because there was then a stretch where I just didn't do anything with them. I wrote, and I felt like I was getting better, and then writing, and then getting better, and writing, and getting better, and then finally, actually, it was my girlfriend, Michelle Hazen, who is a romance writer. She's also an editor, a developmental editor, and a book coach. And she was like, oh, for the love of God, would you just query something? Like, you've done it, you're there, like, just do it. And so I am now querying this book number 6, and I have told myself, like you, I'm going to finish my list. I'm going to do it until I feel like I have some traction. And the truth is, and this is why we're all here today, query letters can be really, really tricky because you write one and you do it to the best of your ability, and then you put it out there. And if it's not getting traction, you may have to tweak your letter. And even if your letter, like mine, which I'm going to show you guys in the second half of this workshop, I totally cheated with mine, and I had the woman who developmentally edited my manuscript. So she'd read my book. She was a professional. She's an editor. I had her write my query letter for me. Like, you don't know this, but you can actually, if you have the money, pay somebody to do it, because I am super intimidated by it, to be honest with you. And so she did my first draft, and I think she did great. But based on some feedback that I've gotten, I've now tweaked it, and I'm putting it out there again. So let's start off. I'm going to present my screen just in case you need a refresher on query letters, or if you don't know what a query letter is, but you're here because you want an agent. Let me show you the parts and pieces of a query letter. So here we go. Here's my presentation, which is on my very last slide. So hang tight, everybody. Well, I go all the way back to the beginning. So here we go. Query letters with me and Alisa. So there are 4 parts to a query letter, right? And now the order in which you present these is sort of up for debate. I learned like one way, but in recent months, as I've been listening to agents do interviews and panels on querying, I see that there's sort of a trend right now where agents prefer to see these details in a different order than my original query that I wrote. You kind of want certain details in what I'll call the prime real estate of a query letter, which is at the very beginning. So we'll kind of talk about that. But the 4 parts that you have to have in your query are this. So part 1 is the details. And the details are things like the hook, the one-line elevator pitch, some people call it, but it's also genre, word count, and title. Hook seems to be the thing that most people maybe panic over a little, so I'm going to show you a couple of hooks just to give you an example. So these are hooks that I pulled off of actual books and actual book covers, okay? So the first one here is The Wild Robot by Peter Brown, and the hook is, can a robot survive in the wilderness? Okay, so that is a pretty good summation in one sentence of what The Wild Robot is about. I love this one for Hot Dog Girl, the book Hot Dog Girl. Everyone falls for the princess. No one ever falls for the hot dog girl. So here's the cover of the book, and you can see she's at a carnival and she's wearing the hot dog costume. So that would be really hard to get a date, I would think, when you're dressed as the hot dog. The next one is actually from The Princess Bride. What happens when the most beautiful girl in the world marries the handsomest prince in the world, and he turns out to be a son of a bitch? Maybe that's not the best summation of Princess Bride. It's, love, true love, but it would make you want to pick up the book, right? And that's the idea. And the last one, I read this book and I loved it. It's from a book called Starter Villain. Inheriting your uncle's super villain business is more complicated than you might think, particularly when you discover who's running the place. Now, I read that in my Will Wheaton voice because Will Wheaton is the one who narrated the audio version of this book, and I thought he did a great job. So anyway, so these are some ideas of what a hook sounds like. So when we talk about the part of the details with the hook and the genre and the word count, yada, yada, the title, this is what a hook is. So the second part that we need to look at is the jacket copy. So the jacket copy, it's also called the flap copy, and it's sort of akin to like the description that you would find on the back of the book or on the inside cover of the book on the flap, if it's a hardback book that has the paper jacket. We're talking 150, maybe 300 words tops, all right? So you're talking a paragraph or two. That's all you really want. It does not, by the way, have to give away any endings or twists. Now, your synopsis will give away your endings and your twists, but that is a separate document from your query that an agent may or may not ask you for. And that's a whole nother workshop unto itself. But the jacket copy here, all its job is to entice the agent to want to pick up and read the book, right? Just like picking up and reading the book in the bookstore, that's what the jacket copy is meant to do. So let's look at a couple of these just to give us an idea of what a jacket copy is. All right, so here we go. We have the wild robot. It says, when Robot Roz opens her eyes for the first time, she discovers that she is alone on a remote, wild island. She has no idea how she got there or what her purpose is, but she knows she needs to survive. So right there, that directly connects back to the hook. You know who the main character is, you know where they are, and you know what the challenge is. So after battling a fierce storm and escaping a vicious bear attack, she realizes that her only hope for survival is to adapt to her surroundings and learn from the island's unwelcoming animal inhabitants. As Roz slowly befriends the animals, the island starts to feel like home until one day the robot's mysterious past comes back to haunt her. Right? So that's the jacket copy. So that's a middle grade book. Here's an example from a YA book. So this is Hot Dog Girl. Eloise Parker is determined to have the absolute best, most impossibly epic summer of her life. There are just a few things standing in her way. Now, I kind of liked this one because it was a little bit of a different structure. So she's landed a job at Magic Castle Playland as a giant dancing hot dog. Her crush, the dreamy, diving pirate Nick, already has a girlfriend who is literally the princess of the park. But Luz never liked anyone, guy or otherwise, this much before, and now she wants a chance at her own happily ever after. Her best friend, Celie, the carousel operator, has always been up for anything, but she's decidedly not on board when it comes to Luz's quest to set her up with the perfect girl or Luz's scheme to get close to Nick. And it turns out that this will be their last summer at Magic Castle Playland ever, unless she can find a way to stop it from closing. So you kind of see what some of the stakes are, you see what the wants are for the characters, and you're introduced to, usually they say no more than 2 or 3 characters in the jacket copy. This one gives you a couple more, but I think that's a really great flap copy as well. And then the last one, and to be honest with you, I don't know if you guys can see me hold up the cover. The cover is 100% what made me want to buy this book. The fact that the title is Starter Villain and there is a cat wearing a suit on the cover, and then the hook being inheriting your uncle's supervillain business is more complicated than you might think, particularly when you discover who's running the place. I didn't even have to read the jacket copy. I was like, I am in. So this one says, Charlie's life is going nowhere fast. A divorced substitute teacher living with his cat in a house his siblings want to sell. All he wants is to open a pub downtown if only the bank will approve his loan. Then his long-lost Uncle Jake dies and leaves his supervillain business, complete with island volcano lair, to Charlie. But becoming a supervillain isn't all giant laser death rays and lava pits. Jake had enemies, and now they're coming after Charlie. His uncle might have been a stand-up, old-fashioned kind of villain, but these are the real thing. Rich, soulless predators backed by multinational corporations and venture capital. It's up to Charlie to win the war his uncle started against a league of supervillains, but with unionized dolphins, hyper-intelligent talking spy cats, and a terrifying hench person at his side, going bad is starting to look pretty good. In a dog-eat-dog world, be a cat. So
that's awesome.
I think, yeah, I mean, those are all great ways. Notice none of them give away the ending. They all sort of give you an idea of like the stakes, the world, the characters, the voice of the novel. I think that's another really important piece. Like, obviously, starter villain, ton of humor in it, as opposed to, the wild robot, which honestly, by the end, made me sob my eyes out. Okay, so I mean, 2 completely different books, obviously for kids, adults, etc. But I thought those were some actually really good examples. So after the jacket copy, you also want to include your comps or your comparative titles. Now, I did a whole class on comp titles once upon a time, and I think we might need to do a whole class on comp titles again. But comps are, I've seen them used kind of two different ways. And so let me show you the first one. So here's, I think, a really great example of a use of comp titles. And note that this one is not all books. So the comp title here was actually, it was the author of Starter Villain. It's a blurb that he did for a book called Space Opera. So this is the book we're talking about here, Space Opera. Catherine M. Valenti is the name of the author. It says, as if Ziggy Stardust went on a blind date with the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, then they got smashed and sang karaoke all night. I think you guys can tell the kind of humorous books that I tend to pick up, since all of these literally came off my shelf. But I thought that was a great use of comps. Notice one is actually like a David Bowie character from a song, so not a book. And the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but then they throw in the they got smashed and sang karaoke all night long. What that does is that really quickly puts the book in your hands. Like, you can hold that vibe in your hands. Like, I mean, you know exactly what this book is going to read like when you see that comp. And I would argue that this is a great thing to put in your prime real estate next to your hook, because an agent is going to read that, see that, and either totally identify with that and want that book, or they're going to be like, that's not something that I think I can sell, in which case be happy that you get a rejection, because you want an agent with the right connections to sell this particular book, okay? So the other thing about comps, though, and we can talk about comps a little bit more when we look at some of these query letters, is for the most part, you need to have at least one that is both recent and relevant. And I would argue relevant means there's just some thread in it that is common with your book. But recent, I've heard people say 3 years, 5 years, but I would say as long as it is a book published within the last 5 years, that is definitely a recent, relevant comp. And I do know agents say you can use a book, you can use a movie, you can use a television show, you can use a comic book. So you just have to use something, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to show an agent, this is the vibe of my book, but you're also trying to tell an agent, like, I also know the market, and these are the books that my book would sit next to in a bookstore shelf. Okay. So there we go, comps. And the last piece that you have to have is the biography. And I know people really panic about the biographies, particularly debut authors that do not have any writing credits to their name. Maybe you don't have an MFA. I don't have an MFA. My master's is in education. Alisa, do you have a degree in creative writing?
I do not.
So see, there are so many people that are writing books that do not have a writing credit necessarily to their name. So I want to show you the biographies from the back of two different debut novels, just to show you an example of what an author biography looks like. So Melissa Desidori lives in New York City with her husband and 3 daughters, with whom she especially likes to share books, spend time outside, eat ice cream, and travel. J.R. Silver Writes Her World is her first novel. All right, so that's how simple your biography can be. Marcy Kate Connolly, this is actually from her debut book, Monstrous, but I believe this was a second print run, because you can see it actually references her second book in her biography. But Marcy Kate Connolly is a writer and arts administrator living in New England with her husband and pugs. She's a coffee addict and a voracious reader. Like, you can pretty much end there. That's all you need to have. I have heard agents say over and over again, they don't care if you don't have writing credits. What they care about is just knowing a little bit about you to see that you're a real person. So don't get really caught up in your biography, and we'll show you some examples again later down the line. But the last piece of a query letter that we have not talked about, I'm calling it bonus content, because it's really a personal preference as to whether or not you want to include it in your query. It is not required, but it is definitely a good idea if you have something to say, and that is personalization. So I'm going to show you the personalization from the last query that I sent out actually earlier this week. So it's the second paragraph here in my query. I am sending you this work because your website says you have an interest in folklore and retellings. Like you, I adore Spirited Away. Hayao Miyazaki also made a film based on The Borrowers, which was a huge inspiration for this book. So, like I said, directly in the personalization here, this particular agent has said very clearly on her manuscript wish list that she liked folklore and retellings. She also made a point of saying somewhere in that manuscript wish list that she loves the movie Spirited Away. And immediately I was like, yes, I love that movie too. I know the director of that movie is Hayao Miyazaki, who also made a film based on The Borrowers called The Secret World of Arrietty. And so that was my connection that made me say, okay, if she likes those two things, she might really like my book. So I made sure to put it, you can see I've got the details in the top here, but then I have my personalization next. So let's look at some queries here. What do you think? Do you have anything you want to add, Alisa? I just kind of steamed through.
I will say white space is a good thing on your query. Break up large chunks of text because a lot of times agents are reading them on the go, on a mobile device. And so being faced with this huge chunk versus kind of breaking it up a little bit, that white space is really your friend. And I think it helps not to put too much information in. Like when I was thinking, I need to break this up. Well, obviously that's lines of space that could have been filled with words. So kind of keeping that in mind too. Short and sweet, easily digestible pieces really help too, I think.
I think so. One of the, like kind of along those lines, one of the things when Jenny Nash was helping me write my first query, she kept like equating it to poetry. And she's like, we're going to go over and over and over and rework these couple of lines, and we're going to tweak and we're going to tighten and we're going to make sure that you are conveying as much information in as little space as possible. And I was like, yeah, that's actually a really great way to look at it, poetry, because, it's like there's an art to this. There's not really a science to this. And everybody does it kind of a little bit differently. So I see we do have a question in the chat. So we have to write our own comps. So yes, you have to find your own comps. So sometimes when I've had a developmental edit, the editor will actually include in my developmental edit letter, like a market comparison or a market breakdown. Not every developmental editor will do this, but they will kind of give you an idea, your book reminds me of this, or this. And then they'll sort of give you a little sentence or two as to why they think that's a good comp. And then you can sort of pull the thread and determine for yourself whether or not you think that's good. But you can also lately I've been a fan of this like AI search engine called Perplexity. It's kind of like a Google search, but you put a question in the search bar. And when it gives you your answers, it will summarize the answers at the top, and then it will give you the links to all the places where it got that information. And I've noticed, I think it does a really good job if you say like, I need comparative titles or read-alikes, which by the way, librarians call them read-alikes. So if you want to go in and ask a librarian, I thoroughly confused a librarian once asking for comp titles, and I had to explain it. And she was like, read-alikes. And I was like, okay, let's call it that.
Whatever gets you to the information.
Okay. So you can ask for those comparative titles and then give it a list of things for your book. So like I said, it had to be a middle grade, low fantasy. that had, I don't know, maybe you say that has an unlikely hero, and then at least one other item from this list, and then give it a list of things that make you think of your book. Like, my book also has an epic quest, magical prophecy, wizards. And so you give it a list of pieces of your book, and then ask it, can you find me 5 titles that are similar? And it's done a really good job, I think, of like kind of narrowing it down. The other thing is you can think of at least one really good comparative title, and then you go to Amazon and look at the also bots. You can see, because that's really what a comp title at this stage of the journey, a comp title is all about marketing. An agent wants to know what are your comps? Were they selling? Did I hear somebody tell me they wish they had the next X that's like your comp title? This is really about marketing. And if you're an indie published author, you want to know, because you might want to buy an Amazon ad that's associated with that comp title, because a reader who loved X book might also like my book. So that's kind of the down and dirty, I guess.
And
about
I also used Goodreads to find comps. They have lists, so I would start with YA fantasy. I would just read blurbs, make some notes. Then I went to my library and I checked out all those books, and then I read them to see, like, are they vibing? So it's not a short process necessarily, because I feel like you do want to at least read enough to make sure it's really vibing with your soul.
Well, yeah, you don't have to read the whole book. So let me put that out. Like, I did tell someone the other day, like, make a list of your comps and then go to the library and pull them off the shelves. And just, maybe you want to read like an agent. So I've heard that what a lot of agents do is they read the first page or two when they have your full, right? Then they flip to the middle and they read somewhere around the 50% mark. Then they flip to the end and they read the last couple pages there. And then if they like it and you've hooked them, they're going to sit down and read the whole thing. But they, can't possibly read everything. Sometimes that's stacked up on their desk. So read like that, go and pull it and just read enough to get an idea. Is this a voice that's similar to mine? Does this give the same feeling? You might read a book and be like, oh, wow, like this is nothing like mine. Like on the surface, maybe it is, but once you start digging deep, it's not. And that's actually not a bad thing, because one of the things that I've done with comps, so like with my first book, when Jenny and I were working on my query, I had Story Thieves, I think was one of my comparative titles. But Story Thieves is very much action, adventure. There's a villain. These characters come out of the book into the real world and they wreak havoc. Okay, so my story had characters that came out of a book, but it was more like a social drama at school. It wasn't necessarily like action and chase and adventure, and it was a different feel. So I think what I said was, it's like Story Thieves with less action adventure and more friendship drama. And so you can use a comp title, but then you can break it down and say, it's like the X of this and the Y of this. And sometimes that's a good way to look at it, so that you realize a comp title does not have to be exactly like your book. I think that's where it, like, really people put the brakes on and think, oh, comp titles are so hard because I can't find anything exactly like what I've written. You don't need it to be exact.
You shouldn't be, right? We're all writing different stuff, and that's why that you want that agent to get it, because it is a little bit different. But
well, and then when
on the shelf, really,
when I read Story Thieves, when I first found it, I actually at first I got really disheartened, because I thought, I can't do this. It's already been written. Like, it's already been written, this book where like characters come out of a book and interact in the real world. And like, I knew about Inkheart, but it felt different from what I was doing. And then I read Story Thieves and I was like, oh no, maybe it's already kind of been done. And that's when Jenny was like, stop. What you're writing is different. It's totally different. Even though you use the same kernel of an idea, it's not derivative as I think you think it is in your brain, you know. So, all right, let's look at some of these query letters. And I think, so I'm going to share my screen. We've got a Google Doc here, and you guys should, let me check. Can you guys see that? Okay, put it in the chat if you guys need it to be a little bit bigger. Alisa, I'm going to let you kind of watch the chat because I'm going to read this kind of out loud for those of you who might have a hard time reading through too. So this was the first version of my query, the one that the editor wrote for me. And I just want to show you this, and then I want to show you how I tweaked it so that you can see what we mean by sometimes making these small changes actually makes a big difference. So
make it just a tad bigger, Abby?
Yes, I can. So let's see. Instead of 150, what if I make it 175? Did that do it?
That's good. You could let us know in the chat. I've got my eye on it.
Okay. So I'm going to read it out loud in case you can't read it. So the Tinker Brothers may be tiny, but they are big trouble. Despite being 6 inches tall, they still managed to accidentally turn a leaky faucet into a gushing geyser, scare a chicken so bad she lays an egg, and land in barnyard jail after a misunderstanding leaves the farm's celebrity pig with yolk on his face. They are the only tiny humans on the Hatley farm, but every toad, pig, rat, and chicken knows who they are. When Scratch and Peck cause one too many problems, they think the farm would be better off without them. As they set off, they stumble across a strange contraption that spoils the very vegetables Farmer Hatley needs to sell. Who would build such a machine and why? With the farm and all its animals in jeopardy, Scratch and Peck realize they're the only ones who can get to the bottom of this mystery. Who else would take the risks they're willing to take to sniff out the culprit? But the Doolittle County Fair is the make-or-break event for Farmer Hatley, and it's fast approaching. Can the Tinker Brothers solve the mystery to save their animal friends in time? And can they do it without making any more trouble of their own? Now, Alisa, you're the one who kind of gave me, I think, the best feedback for tweaking this part right here. So it's this bit. I'll kind of highlight it here. This is what I would call the jacket copy of my query. And actually, when I sent this query, above the jacket copy, so in the top part was where I was putting the personalization right out of the go. And then I was putting the jacket copy next. And so do you want to tell everybody listening, like, what your one biggest thing was that you said about it?
Was it the questions?
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
So I had the same thing in my early iterations of query letter was like, can such and such do this before this? Can they whatever? And I got some feedback from an agent that's like, yeah, but what if we made this into a statement? You know, what if it wasn't a question, but instead kind of really emphasize the agency and the choices that your main characters are making. So instead of it being a question, it's the Tinker Brothers must solve the mystery in order to, or before X, instead of can they, it's like they have to. And that kind of brings a different intensity, I think, to it.
Yeah, and I actually thought that was an amazing piece of feedback. So you guys are going to see in a minute how I took that and I changed it. The other thing that I did, I think based on, you had given me some of Eric Smith's links to his website. So Eric Smith is an agent who, one of the things I love about his website is that he shows you the query letters of writers that he ended up signing, and then he breaks down why he liked those queries. And the thing that I noticed in a lot of them was that this next part here, so these are the details. So remember I said that was the first thing we talked about. One of the 4 parts of a query letter were the details. I was putting my details next. But after seeing all of Eric Smith's and then attending an agent panel last week where the agent was telling me she likes to see the details very first thing, because that tells her, is this a book I'm really going to like or not? She said this gives her a huge idea about, okay, that's something I can sell, I would read, that sort of thing. So mine said complete at 44,000 words. The Tinkers is about the desire to be seen for our good intentions, even if we royally screw things up. So this is my hook right here. It's a book about the desire to be seen for our intentions, even if we royally screw things up, right? It was inspired by my life on our hobby farm full of misfit animals, including 3 gigantic rescue pigs, that's a thing, and a handful of troublesome rats. It was also inspired by my childhood obsession with Mary Norton's The Borrowers and my absolute undeniable belief that Fraggles lived in my closet. So actually, some of this could really be in my bio. I wove it in because, like, to me, this was what made me the best person to write this book, was my inspiration for it. So I sort of put it in there. The next thing I did was I addressed my comps. So these are the Tinkers combines the tiny people of The Borrowers with the heart and setting of Charlotte's Web, sprinkle in the characters and car chases of the Dukes of Hazzard, and the mystery of the unusual chickens for the exceptional poultry farmer by Kelly Jones. This book is the next step up in reading level for lovers of the miniature world of Marvin and James series by Kelly Murphy, and would appeal to the animal-loving fans of the One and Only series by Catherine Applegate. Now, I probably put way too many comps in there, but the way I see it is these first 3 here, all the way to the Dukes of Hazzard, that's kind of like if Ziggy Stardust sang karaoke with, Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? Those are like really old. Yeah. That's the vibe of my book, but these are the recent and relevant comps that I have. And then the last bit that I have is just my bio. Before setting my sights on writing, I spent a decade pretending to be the adult in a 9th grade classroom where I taught drawing and fine art. Now I'm the community manager at Dabble writer. I also teach a class in memoir and creative writing to veterans. Once upon a time, I co-hosted a podcast called Mom Writes with book coach Jenny Nash of Author Accelerator, and I'm a member of SCBWI. So this is, for those of you that don't know, this is a writers organization, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, which is a professional organization for my genre. So thank you for your consideration. So what I did, and I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but I do want you to just take note right here. So I moved the details of my book up top. Okay, so The Tinkers is middle grade low fantasy with a nostalgic vibe, reimagining the mysterious British brownies folklore in a small town southern setting. So I'll tell you what I did was, after reading a whole bunch of agents' web pages, I noticed there's a couple of things. One, I see people looking for a nostalgic vibe. Thank you, Stranger Things, right? So that's one piece I wanted to make sure to work in. And I also hear people talking about they want reimagined folklore. So I made sure to include that right up here in my very first sentence. I reimagined a British folklore story in a small town southern setting. Okay, so I moved that up to the top in that prime real estate. I have my hook, I have the 44,000 words, and I put just those vibes of my comps up at the top. Okay, then I'm going to put the personalization here next. And then if they read all of that and they're like, yes, this is for me, then they're going to go into my jacket copy. And I think the only part you really need to see is I redid that last bit that was full of those rhetorical questions and made it say, with the Doolittle County Fair fast approaching, Scratch and Peck must get to the bottom of this mystery before Farmer Hatley, gulp, sends Bigelow off to market to make up for the lost crops. With the farm's future and the pig's life on the line, tracking down the culprit without causing any more chaos might be their biggest challenge yet. Because I think you're really right, Alisa. That was that gives them a lot more agency than I think it had previously.
Yeah, and I think questions can sometimes work on the blurb because there is obviously a small difference between that jacket copy. So that could be your like sort of headline as a question and then you're kind of digging into it. But when you want the agent to sit up and take notice, it's like give them as much agency as possible. Things happen because of what they do versus things happening to them. So this is great because I totally get the vibe of it, the scariness, the stakes are there. I love the, like, can they do this without making a bigger mess? Like,
Yeah.
I love that.
So, okay, I want to look now at your query, and you have two versions too. Do you want to read these out? Can you see it? You've got your second screen pulled up, right?
I have my second screen, yes. And so the biggest thing, I think, I won't read the first one, but when most recently I was in a roundtable with a couple of agents, they were like, you have too much information here and not enough, which is weird, but it's happening because it was almost too much, actually, story information and not as much about why it was unique. So a big draw has been this, like, Aurora Borealis connection. You know, there's not a ton of stories that involve that. Personally, I think the Aurora is actually magical, but I digress. So they were like, really focus in on that, because that sounds really cool, and then you never mention it again. And then again, with too many characters, even though it was only a few, it just started to feel like we were losing the thread. So I kind of took out, I put in my notes here, you know, I've highlighted the Aurora's connection, and I've removed this paragraph about these two other characters. So if we go down to the second version,
yes,
I've got, yes, and Abby, here's where you noted about, like, I don't really have a lot of personalization to connect with this agent, because while you get all that great advice of watch, you know, videos and listen to podcasts, like, quite honestly, if you did that for every single agent you might possibly want to query, you wouldn't actually have time to write your book. So, you know, you're kind of skimming their pages. If you're on Twitter still, or Threads and Blue Sky now, like, just kind of, if you can find something, then you can kind of put it in here, but don't try to be their BFF when you've never met them, you know? So,
yeah, read that. You want me to read that line? Because I have it really big on my screen.
Sure.
So Alisa put, I'm excited about your specific interest in YA fantasy, and as a debut author, appreciate your knowledge and experience in the industry. So I just pointed out to her that that's, like, great, just kind of generalized. Of course, that's why you are choosing this particular agent, right? But you're putting that in there just, like, as a way to acknowledge that you actually researched that about them. So
yeah, and if there's something like the one agent I queried yesterday, she had something in her blurb on the agency page about having to get a separate truck to pack up all of her books when she moved, and I was like, hello, yes, I would be in the same. So I was like, you know, I love that, because, you know, I totally identify with that. So it can be something small like that that's just jumps out at you.
And the agent panel that I went to last week, actually, she really, I think this stuck with me, because she said only maybe 10% of the queries that she opens has any sort of personalization in it. So she said right there, if you say something personal about that, and you know, that agent, and doesn't have to be anything mind-blowing, but if you just put in, like, oh yes, I've looked you up, I know about you, not in a creepy way, but that actually kind of floats your query up a little, because it shows you've researched them. So I think it's kind of nice thinking about being in the top 10%, you know? So.
Absolutely. Yeah. So then in the next section, so I jump right in at the top with, you know, my metadata, that genre and word count and title, and don't stress about your title, right? Unless it's something weirdly inappropriate, it doesn't matter what it is. Just put something in there. I struggle. My titles change so many times. That second section here is my hook and also my comp. So it's like, you know, here's what the stakes of this, you know, story are, and then here's things that if readers liked This Poison Heart or Blood Like Magic, then they're gonna like this book. And those are all duologies, so I have debated on, like, making mine more current by picking the second book in the duology instead of the first. I don't know that that's necessary, but again, yes, within that 5 years is really important. And then here's kind of where I split things up a little bit more, so there's more white space, because again, we just want them to be able to quickly read on their phone or an iPad, like really quickly without feeling overwhelmed. So we still talk about this weird, why does this person want to be friends with me after they've never talked to me? But I took out all of the discussion about Gabe and what happens and how he gets trapped and yada yada, because that's kind of a separate thread of the plot. So we really focused in on my main character Jules and how things are getting weird for her, and then what is kind of resolving that, why things are weird, because she learns that she's connected to the Aurora Borealis. She's experiencing the world in a new way because she's lost this necklace that was actually keeping her magic at bay, and really kind of hone in on the Aurora and on Jules and on her, again, her agency. So again, tightening it up. I've had more positive feedback the shorter my query got. It wasn't super long before, but again, anywhere you can tighten, anywhere you can remove a word, I think is to your benefit.
Do you want to, just to kind of show that, and I didn't think about this, if we look at this, so this is what the query looks like now. So you can see the white space that she's talking about. This is how it looked before. So you can see her paragraphs are longer and sort of blockier. This is maybe a little bit easier to read because you have the shorter one here. That's kind of what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just a visual change more than a content change.
Yeah.
And agents don't want you to only take up half a page. Like, they want all of those parts. So don't feel like you have to shortchange yourself. If you go over a page, that's kind of a red flag that maybe you need some further editing or another set of eyes on your document. But if you're keeping it in the one page and you got good white space, I think you're in good shape.
Yeah, actually, and let me show you guys just to kind of go through all the rest of these queries. So we have Journey's, Nicole's, and Beth's and B's all here, and you can see one page. So you guys did great. I mean, Beth's kind of goes a little onto the second page, but to be fair, I took up a lot of space with the title because I wanted to be able to jump around on the side. But everybody has pretty much stuck to one page. And so I think, everybody who's given us their queries, you've done a really good job of sort of condensing into that kind of the confines of the one page. And so Journey's query is next. And I worked on Journey's query with her for a little while before she went off to a conference where she may or may not have been able to meet an agent. So she wanted to have everything ready before she went to this conference. And her query was really tricky because it's 100,000 words and it's 3 points of view. So you really have to get a lot of information into this one page in order to make, somebody want and get a good enough version of the picture or vision of the picture of the story to want to pick it up and read more. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually read her jacket copy to you here, and then I'm going to read her jacket copy again, because if you look, all of my suggestions here, which I'll kind of walk you guys through, I'll even tell you the parts that I just loved, but they're all about her jacket copy. Most of this, the details, you guys know how many words are in your manuscript. Hopefully you know what your genre is. If you don't panic. We can talk about that. She's got her comps, down here. But let's look at, let me make it bigger for you guys. Jane pointed out, we have old eyes. There we go. Here we are. So I said, you've got to remember the personalization. And Journey, I'm so sorry if you're listening. I'm gonna butcher all the names, you guys, because I'm not good at the fantasy names. Satulinar, Cosmina, may be the girl from the ancient prophecy, the girl fated to rescue her land from an ancient darkness. But when she sets out from her sheltered life, it's only to save her sister Esmeralda from the bandits. Esmeralda from the bandits. Because she loves her sister more than anything in the world, and she would do anything to save her. Even as she uncovers dark secrets and becomes intertwined in a dangerous world far beyond her imagining. Even if it means sacrificing all she has worked so hard to protect. So let's look at this first, all right? So the first thing I told her is, condense some of this if you can. like some of what I'm reading here is a little bit redundant. And since this is a query, we just need to be quick to get to the punch. All right. So she's Satu is what she calls her, I think, later in the query or in another query. So when 14-year-old Satu, so again, I know this from querying middle grade and YA. If you're writing kid lit, you need the age of your protagonist. You do not need that, by the way, if you're writing an adult book, because nobody needs to know 26-year-old Angelina Brangelina is looking for a boyfriend. Like nobody, that doesn't matter. But if you're writing kid lit, you need the age in there. So when 14-year-old Satu Kosnina sets out from her sheltered life, it isn't to save her land from an ancient darkness, as the prophecy states. It's to save her older sister from bandits. Like, I would be tempted to even leave it right there. And I'll tell you why, because I told her this statement here: she loves her sister more than anything in the world and would do anything to save her. That's sort of easy to imply, and it's not very specific, because would do anything is pretty general, right? But I mean, if she's setting out from her sheltered life to save her sister from bandits, I would assume it's because she loves her, right? So even as she uncovers dark secrets and becomes intertwined in a dangerous world far beyond her imagining, right? Because I said this is a piece to work in elsewhere, maybe because it describes all three of her main characters here. But all of this here is just so general, it didn't really give me an idea of the specifics of the book. And I think, Alisa, you mentioned that with yours, that you tried to give something that was story specific, that made your book unique and unlike other fantasy books. So that was sort of my my feedback with this first paragraph. So then she cuts, because she does have 3 points of view. Each one of these paragraphs is about one of her other points of view, which is great. So Esmeralda Kosmina may be caught up in a deadly game of power and intrigue, but she's still honor bound to protect her sister, just as she has their entire life. As she becomes closer to a boy she's not sure she can trust and discover things that unmakes her view of the world, however, she begins to question exactly who exactly she is fighting for and why. So here's what I told her. With this first sentence, I had difficulty connecting that it was the sister at first, right? Because I was reading it fast. Agents read this really fast. Caught up in a deadly game of power and intrigue suggests to me that she's playing it willingly, not that she's been captured. And it was also sort of breaking my brain, right? Trying to figure out how, if she's captured, she's also protecting her sister. So I was like, that didn't make sense to me, and it sort of took me out of the story for a second. So I wanted her to tweak this paragraph and say, like, can she include an example of something that unmakes this world view that she has? So right here, the use of the word things is where it starts to veer into like a vagueness. And I wanted her to make it more specific, right? So, and I know it's weird. I think, like you were saying, Alisa, like you don't have enough information and you have too much information. This is sort of an example of that. Like, the information you're giving is so vague and so general, but what we're really looking for is something super specific to the story. So then getting to the third point of view right here, Celesthin Montayan, right? Maybe the boy fated to help bring about the unmaking of the world. The boy fated to oppose Satu and Esmeralda and the society called the Aldria Mir, fated to release a nameless evil upon the land. But he cannot remember his past, though he does not know why. And without a past, how can he know who he really is? Finding that lines are blurring and fates are shifting, Celesthin must struggle to deal with the shadows of his past before they catch up to the shadows in his future, right? So I, again, put in 17-year-old Celesthin Montoyan, right? And then here I said, he doesn't know this at the beginning though, right? So if you can reword this to show his emotional arc, Like, will he have to decide between fulfilling his destiny and protecting his friends? That might be really enticing to an agent. All right. So I also really, really loved, though, this little bit right here, which I think is kind of her hook. Fates collide and destinies intertwine in this 3 POV young adult fantasy novel. So these are details, right? In a world where magic is not just a bedtime story and every action can change the course of the land, 3 teenagers must struggle to decide what lengths they're willing to go to see their kingdoms safe. So I thought that was a great hook. All right. And then she ends with her details. So the full 100,000 word manuscript available upon your request. It says, imagine it's a story of adventure and magic, and it will appeal to fans of. So again, Journey left her comp titles out because she was still looking for those, which is great that you're doing the research. She did have this one comp title here, which I just reminded her that you italicize, put who it's by. I looked it up. It's Rebecca Ross. And she knows, I said just one more maybe can go here. And this was advice that actually both Alisa and I said we agreed with. Don't put that this is your 7th unpublished novel, because I'm not going to write that it's my 6th unpublished novel, only because I don't want to have to answer questions about what happened to the first 5. And I don't think she wants to have to answer questions about what happened to the first 6. So I think at one point I had put this is my debut novel in one of my queries from one of my previous books. And I did that because Jenny told me to. And then I heard an agent say, don't tell me it's your debut novel. I don't care. I actually assume it's your debut novel if you're looking for an agent. I was like, oh, okay. So if you're looking for a place to cut words, you can cut that piece out. But she did put in her bio here that she has working in an anthology, which is fantastic. So just to really quickly, because I don't want to take up too much time, I think she did a great job tightening up that jacket copy. So let's look at that. So Satu Kosmina may be the girl from the ancient prophecy, the girl fated to rescue her land from an ancient darkness, but when she sets out from her sheltered life, it's only to save her sister Esmeralda from the ruthless bandits who captured her. Esmeralda, thrown from one deadly situation to the next, now caught up in a treacherous game of power and intrigue, embroiled with a society called the Aldream Mirror, must come to terms with her past and the father who abandoned her in order to ensure that her land has a future worth living in. And as she becomes closer to a boy she's not sure she can trust and contends with the grudges of her past, she begins to question who she is fighting for and why. So she's made that a little more specific. Selethin Montoyan may be cursed to be the bearer of a dark power destined to unmake the very world Satu and Esmeralda are sacrificing so much to protect. But he has become rather attached to the stubborn and charming sisters and her, or Esmeralda and her idealistic younger sister. And he has no wish to destroy his world, however poorly it has treated him in the past. To me, that's way more interesting. Grappling with who he wishes to be and who fate says he must become, Selethin, finding that lines are blurred and fates are shifting, must struggle to deal with the shadows of his past before they catch up to the shadows in his future. So really my only, the only thing I kind of want to say about this is you do need to push the ages in. That part was left out. And Alisa, you said this particular sentence here feels like an important distinction, and you'd recommend sort of making it its own sentence.
Yeah, just that period's going to be a stop, and then you're going to pick it back up versus it kind of going together, just because that is kind of the crux of his arc. Yeah. Is what is he going to do? Does he support them? Does he let the world burn because of his past? It's just, that's an important part to his arc, I think.
Yeah. And the other thing that we did say is nowhere in here does Journey put the title of her book. So you're going to want to definitely work that in, because she's got, that it's 3 points of view. She's got that it's a young adult fantasy novel. She's got her hook here. She's got that it's 100,000 words, but she did leave out that one really important piece, which is the title. So All right, let's move on and let's look at Nicole's query. So Nicole's query is very short because it's for her urban romance fantasy novella. So I did actually sort of look this up because novellas and short stories, I think, are going to be a little bit harder of a sell to get an agent. I don't want to say it's impossible. But I will say you might want to consider querying small presses, which Alisa and I are going to do actually a workshop on that next week. So shameless plug, come watch that one. But it might be harder to find an agent. Does not mean do not work on a query letter. Do not try. There are agents out there that do say that they will consider a novella. But there are also small presses that accept novellas. And so kind of put that in your brain because you're going to need a query letter for a small press as well. So this is all good work to kind of focus on. So Nicole's got, dear agent, I'm seeking representation for my urban romance fantasy novella Before Things Begin, which is complete at 19,000 words. Naisel Epforth and her partner Cargo have just moved back to the small town of Echo after working in New York. Naisel is hoping to rejoin the Echo Police Department with Cargo, a highly trained canine officer. When the chief of police, Tom, is called away to an officer-involved shooting, Naisel has a chance to explore her old bedroom in Tom's house and reminisce about the past. As she settles into her new apartment and reconnects with Tom and her old friend Joe, she can't shake the feeling that something sinister is lurking nearby. Before Things Begins is a prequel novella with a series currently in progress. So that's definitely going to be interesting to an agent. I have been planning this series and its various points of view and character arcs for over 10 years. This novella was an honorable mention during the 2024 Kindle Vella Challenge. Amazing to put in your bio, by the way. Though I don't have any formally published works under my belt yet, I am eager to find an agent who shares my passion for urban fantasy and can help me reach a wider audience. So thank you for your time and consideration. I look forward to hearing from you. This piece right here, you could actually sort of tweak a little bit and make it your personalization, which I think would be great. Alisa, do you want to kind of take this one? You can click it from your document, right?
Yes, I see that here. Yep. Yeah, the top, Abby, you had put in a comment about adding a hook towards the beginning. I don't know if I.
Oh, yeah. If I click it.
If you click
right
it.
Here?
Yeah, right in the beginning there. And so I kind of tweak that section a little bit just to give her an example, because also I think identifying Cargo as actually a dog. I mean, yeah. Cargo, you wouldn't necessarily expect that to be a person's name, but again, agents are moving fast. Like, let's get to that critical information. So tweaking that a little bit so it's Naisel and her highly trained canine partner Cargo. So right away we say, like, this is the partnership. They've just moved back to the small town of Echo after working in New York, hoping to rejoin the Echo Police Department. Because why? Like, that's what we need to know. Like, that's her why and her like motivation for coming back. So we need something there. Why bringing Cargo is particularly important. So I think that can really enhance the like understanding of what we're doing here and why we're doing it. Abby, you had some questions about, the living arrangements, and I totally agree with that. We're trying to keep it short. She's got plenty of room here to expand and give us a little bit more detail, like what is happening? Why is this kind of maybe a mysterious thing to be poking around? Why is her old bedroom still the same? There's a lot of questions here that I think we can dig into. Like you said, Abby, it kind of took you out of the story a little bit. I agree. And again, plenty of room here. She doesn't have to be worried right now about cutting everything like we're always talking about. We can really expand. Let's see. I had something else I think I had noted.
Oh, I think it was right here. You might leave this part out.
That part, and then just before that, I think, or was it just after that? She can't shake the feeling that something sinister is lurking nearby. So again, this is more general, like we were talking about before. So get a little bit more specific. There's shadows lurking around corners. There's a mysterious car following her around town. The shopkeeper who knows more than they're letting on. There's some things that we can not give anything away with a twist, but again, be more specific so that the agent isn't trying to fill in their blank there. And then, I think leaving out that piece about I've been working on this for 10 years. One of the aspects of working with an agent and a publisher is not nothing, but you can't be too precious, right? With your words, with your characters to an extent. Obviously, if someone's coming at you and wanting to change the whole entire focus of your book and your vision for it, that's a red flag. But they're going to come back with some changes for you. Like everybody that goes through that traditional process, like there is editing that happens often with the agent and then again with the publisher. So this might give the agent a vibe that you might not be willing to do those edits, even if you perfectly are. Like, I just feel like this could be a bit of a stumbling block with an agent. So
like you're married, you're going to be too married to something and not be willing to change it if it makes a stronger book, which like I agree with you in that doesn't necessarily mean what that means. Like it doesn't mean that, but you don't want to risk anybody maybe thinking it. I was actually taking it kind of from a different angle. I mean, publishing is slow as molasses in January at Doug's house, right? So, I mean, it's so slow, but I think I would leave it out because you don't want agents to think, well, after 10 years, you only have a novella. And, well, why aren't you pitching me with the first book? And, well, why did it take you? I mean, it takes a lot of people 10 years to write a book, but you don't want them to think that you're going to be slow in the future. And I don't think that's actually what you're saying here at all. And so, but you don't want them to misunderstand that. And so I think that's just like sometimes giving them less is more. And so I think I would cut it as well, particularly because you have this piece right here, which is freaking fantastic. Like, you don't want them to get stuck on the, it took you 10 years to get here. What you want is them to focus on things like, holy crap, she got an honorable mention during the Kindle Vella Challenge. Like, that's a feather in your cap. That you need to make that piece shine down here, because that shows, hey, I wrote this novella and it got some accolades. So anyway, I guess my question would be here is, if this is already self-published, and I didn't think about that until we just started talking about this. If you won this honorable mention for the Kindle Vella, did you already self-publish this book with Kindle Vella? And if you did, that you will have to look up, like, how does that work if you're now seeking traditional representation for it?
And I did do a little Google on that because I had that thought too. I was like, ooh, if you participate in the challenge, is your book considered published? I did not find a definitive answer easily. I do also know that Kindle Vella is no longer a thing. Right. So that might give you some flexibility because you can't access stuff through Kindle Vella. But I would definitely want to double check that it's not really considered published, even though you weren't selling copies. Like, it's just a gray area that you want to at least have enough information so that when you get the call, when you're talking to the agent, if this comes up, you're able to speak about what that means, what was involved, were people reading it, or was it just a group of judges? You know, there's so many variations in there that might play a role.
Yeah. And if you don't end up going the traditional route with this, I want to point out that this is actually like what Doug was saying yesterday, actually in our office hours for the premium channel. We were talking about lead magnets for your newsletter. And he's like, a novella is by far like the most valuable lead magnet that you could give away, particularly if it's a lead magnet that goes to this. Like, if you then start to self-publish the books that are in this world and you have a prequel novella that's your lead magnet, like, that's amazing. So I think what you have here is a great start. but it's not just a great start for traditional, it's also a great start for indie. And so anyway, congratulations, Nicole, because I think you got something good. And I did just put in here, we'll just kind of briefly kind of look at this. These are small presses where they accept romance novellas. And when I give you back your query, Nicole, I'm going to leave these links in there for you. This is a list, takes you to a list. This I found Partridge Island Publishing. They're looking for full-length novels and novellas. They're interested in urban fantasy, and it's a Canadian publisher, I believe, but it's a small press. Also, Brain Jar is currently closed. They reopen in late 2025, but they will also take novellas. So you can, if you tweak this query letter, you can use it to query these presses without an agent. So, all right, let's move on to Beth's query. So again, here's Beth's query. I will read it really fast for you. And I had a good giggle because I've also queried this particular agent. She's a young new agent looking to build her list. So fantastic. So she leads with her details right here. When searching for an agent to represent my 117,000 word fantasy novel, I found my writing resonating with items on your wish list, such as fiction with a strong emotional core and a romantic core guaranteed to break hearts in the best way. My fantasy novel, To Break a Prophecy, has similar elements to the Shepherd King duology by Rachel Gillig, such as a brutal monarchy, an underdog prince, and a woman with a past and power strong enough to rip everything apart. To Break Prophecy's major theme of how choices affect lives of characters more than fate is interwoven with themes of family grief and loss. When a lightning sorcerer meets an idealistic prince trying to negotiate peace against the wishes of his brutal father, their budding romance is threatened by a prophecy that she will kill him. Cassandra, a lightning sorcerer, is pointedly ignoring that she is destined to kill the royal family of Aldria. While searching for her brother, she becomes entangled with Prince Gavin Aldrich and sparks fly. She is determined to break the prophecy and keep Gavin safe as he works towards peace with the neighboring land of Flavanor. However, Gavin's father, the King of Aldria, will not deviate from his desires, will conquer Flavanor, and kill the sorcerer from the prophecy plaguing his family. When Cassandra turns to her estranged mentor for help, she learns how much power choices can have over prophecies. To Break Prophecy is my first novel, but I have had short stories featured in publications or highly ranked contests. I've included the list below. Stories are my passion, whether I'm writing them for myself or helping others improve. In college, I took 2 creative writing courses by Michigan author John Smolens, and I recently participated in author Jed Hearn's 7-week fantasy outlining boot camp. I started a local writing critique group in 2020 that meets monthly, and I moderate and provide feedback matches for an online fantasy writers guild. Thank you for your time and consideration. So do you have something, Alisa, with this first?
Yeah, so I kind of, and I know I highlighted that first part, but then I kind of merged the whole first section there prior to Cassandra sort of together. Like, again, there's a lot of really great stuff here. There's not a lot of white space. So how can we kind of compress and reorganize to get to the heart of things quickly and kind of just open up that space on the page? So in the top, kind of bringing the title to the top of the query, I gave her an example, something like, your wish list describes your desire for fiction with strong emotional and romantic cores guaranteed to break hearts in the best way. I believe my fantasy novel, To Break Prophecy, complete at 117,000 words, brings these elements together. So you've put your genre and all that information there and kind of that connectivity with the agent. And then the part that she's got italicized is definitely the hook, right? So let's kind of bring that to the top too. And so then when a lightning sorcerer meets an idealistic prince trying to negotiate peace against the wishes of his brutal father, their budding romance is threatened by a prophecy that she will kill him. To Break Prophecy will appeal to readers of Rachel Gillig's The Shepherd King, highlighting the themes of family, grief, and loss interwoven with the power to overcome fate and ability to chart one's own path. So again, we're just kind of compressing and reorganizing. Didn't really change any of the content, but we're bringing in comps here as well as leading with that hook. So it just kind of reorganizes things in a way that I think gets the attention of the agent maybe a little bit more effectively.
Yeah, I think that was part of what, and now that I'm like rereading this piece, I think, oh, I'm actually going to because I said consider moving it down, because I felt like she was devoting a lot of time to the Shepherd King, but then I realized, wait, it's got similar elements to the Shepherd King.
Right.
But, this piece, I think, will make a lot of sense if it's down towards the bottom. And I agree that this is so compelling. It's such a great hook. I hate to see it sort of buried a third of the way down. Exactly. I really think it's got to move up, definitely, because it's really, really good. So, and I'd argue again, like, just take out the part that it's my first novel and focus on the fact that you have short stories and highly ranked contests. I think that's really great, because I'm looking mostly, it just says, oh, good, perfect. I had to laugh. I thought it was really good. Where was that line that I saw? Oh, pointedly ignoring that she is destined to kill the royal family. There was something about adding that word pointedly that I was like, oh my God, that's so good. Anyway, that just made me smile when I read it. So I think this is great, Beth. You've got a really good start, and it's just a matter of rearranging, kind of giving it the white space, tightening some of it up. I do feel like that there's a lot of names and places thrown in here. So as you tighten it, I think if you can just focus on the ones that are the most important, that also helps. Although I know people who read fantasy and who rep fantasy are probably going to go with the flow on that. I do think that if somebody is reading quickly, you've really got to focus in on just the people and the places that are most important to the plot. And so, all right, we got one left to go. Where is it? Here we go. B's query. So let me take a sip really fast. All right, so B, I was still trying to sort of figure out a few things, and I think B is in the audience today. So B, is this one short story or a group of short stories? I don't know why I had this all. I think I might have even asked you in the Storycraft Cafe at one point, and I've slept since then, and so I don't remember what you told me. So maybe you could put it in the chat here. So B broke her query down a little bit differently, and I think she only did this, and let me kind of zoom out. I think you only did this because James Wade gave you the 4 parts, and so you were just kind of answering those questions in order to maybe put it together in a more typical query letter fashion. So let's look at these pieces, and then let's talk about how we can put these pieces together to make kind of a typical query letter that you would send to an agent. So I'm going to zoom back in because, like Jane says,
it is a series. She has 3 written so far.
Yeah. So I think that is great, because if it was a single short story, I think we put that in the lead magnet category. But since it's a series of short stories that are all very clearly related, and I'm super excited about it. I have to admit, I'm not a huge fan of dragon books, but I would totally read this because it's about dragons and cats. So the first thing that I can say, just looking at the About Me section, is we probably don't need this big of an About Me section. So remember those bios that I showed you on the back of, those debut novels. So here's Monstrous right here, and you open up the back and it's just this little teeny tiny thing. I don't think you necessarily have to have all of this, but there are pieces of this that I think are fantastic that I'm going to suggest that you leave. So let's kind of read this little bio and break it down, because I know B will let us get nerdy and really edit it. So she writes under the pseudonym B. Dragonia. Her name is B. Hatcher. I am 66 years old. I live in Southwest Missouri. where I sit in the dark like a dragon hoarding stories in my mind until I finally burst out with a long flame to create them for others to read. I never leave my cozy cave to venture into the light of day. I don't remember learning to read, and I was writing before I began kindergarten. I have degrees in many fields from architecture, nursing, EMT, and computer science, as well as my CDL, where I drove semis across the country for a few years. B, you're so fascinating. In school, I was always in trouble for talking too much, like I wasn't. Now, instead of talking, I type, and I have turned my mind to a fantasy world where anything is possible. My cats, Midna and Link, my love of dragons that I collect, and my great-granddaughter, who was born in the year of the dragon, are my inspirations for writing. I write this series of books for her. So, here are the couple things that I would say. First of all, I think you can leave out that you're 66 years old. I don't often see writers put their age in there, so I don't think you have to take up space with that. So you can kind of get rid of that. I say it's okay to leave your pseudonym, your real name, and that you live in Southwest Missouri if you want to. I love this comparison right here. You might find a way to work it in and keep it, the dragon hoarding stories in my mind until finally they burst from a long flame to create them for others to read. I think what that does is it shows your voice, which is amazing. But I would maybe take out like some of the degrees, only because even though Hank just wrote this awesome post in the community about how all the things that we do for our day job actually feed into our writing. And I 100% think that that is true here. But this is something you could maybe talk about when you get an agent on the phone and you kind of get to know each other. But because I think we're going to be pressed for this prime real estate again, I think it's okay to cut this part. But I would leave this part. In school, I was always in trouble for talking too much. Now, instead of talking, I type and turned my mind to fantasy in a world where anything is possible. I think that's just charming, and it shows who you are, probably just as much as the rest of this does. But I just thought that was fantastic. Do you have anything you want to say about that, Alisa, before I...
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you said. This is all really great content for that, bio piece. When you pick out like the 2 or 3 sentences that really feel like they're representative of you, and then that's your base bio, I think it would be really good. Like keeping your cats in there, like that's cool. They like to know if you have pets, that kind of stuff. But yeah, just kind of think about 2 or 3 sentences.
And the cats link to her books. So right. I think that's a direct connection. But don't get rid of this, because that can be on your website.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Because I think, we're not saying cut, get rid, just like repurpose maybe in another part. So again, though, I think we would take this part and move it to the bottom B when we start to put this together as a query. So what is your story about? So cats are curious creatures. What other animal can jump on you and be as light as a feather, or feel like a ton of bricks have dropped on you? Have you ever wondered how that is even possible? Because cats used to be dragons. They were nearly hunted to extinction by mankind in self-defense. They gathered the last of the magic in the world and transformed into domesticated cats, where if you are very special, you can talk to one and learn their secrets. There are twists and turns on how a cat can be a dragon and a cat. You can find those details out in the short story series of Where Have All the Dragons Gone? So I don't know why I missed that. I mean, and I read this probably twice, but that also tells you guys, agents are reading so fast that sometimes if a query hinges on like one word, they can miss it. So I missed it, and I can't believe I did. So I think that this is really great because it's what ties all your stories together. And it's interesting. So do you want to say anything about this before I move on?
I think instead of short story series, maybe use the word anthology, because that might jump out to an agent a little bit more clearly.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so brief synopsis. You said, in the midst of time, long ago, when magic ruled and dragons flew, dragons were free, and then mankind came. As men encroached further and further into the lands where dragons lived, the inevitable happened. Man wanted the dragons in their lands and began to take them by force. The queen of the dragons gathered the last magic on earth, and the dragons transformed into domesticated cats. As cats, they moved in with mankind to rid them of pests who devoured their foods and caused illness. This series is about the lives of the dragons that became the very first cats and their interactions with humanity along the way until the present, where a very special young lady can write their stories out for the world to learn and enjoy. So what I'm going to say about this is I would actually argue that these two pieces have a lot of repetitive parts to it. So we can, I think, combine them into one and use that in lieu of like the jacket copy. Would you agree, Alisa?
Yeah, and that was kind of my comment there on the side because I absolutely love dragons. I've always had cats. I'm totally down with this. I think with an anthology, there's usually a connected theme or arc that kind of goes through that. So kind of thinking through what is that thread that connects all the stories. Is it a specific person, a specific cat, a specific dragon, whatever it is? And that kind of becomes that narrative thread, the long narrative thread that kind of encompasses all of the stories in the anthology. So kind of bringing both of these sections together, what your story is about, the actual synopsis of like what's actually happening, bringing that into like one paragraph that's really giving that story arc, that narrative arc that captures the uniqueness of these stories, because as many dragon stories as I've never read anything with this exact.
I know.
So I think that's super cool, and that's something unique that you definitely want to highlight. So like we're getting that overall picture of like dragons becoming cats and some generals about the obstacles, but I think just kind of getting a little bit more specific of that and really thinking about what's that overall arc for the whole series of stories that you're telling, I think will make this really powerful.
Yeah, and I think the connecting threads are, the dragons are now cats, but also this piece where a very special young lady can write their stories out for the world to learn and enjoy. I'm assuming that there's a narrator, the same narrator for every one of the stories, and that's part of the connecting thread. Which I think is fascinating and a great structure for an anthology of short stories, all written by the same writer. And so now looking at this last bit, your credentials, and that's, I remember James talked about the 4 C's, and one of them was credentials. And so she has, as for my writing career, it's been as varied as my education and jobs. I've written descriptive copy for an artist, worked briefly as a ghostwriter for a woman who passed away before it was complete, helped geriatric patients write their life stories, written a gluten-free cookbook, several speeches for others over the years. And at one time I participated in an email writing club based on the worlds created by Anne McCaffrey in her books on dragons. In November 2024, I participated in and completed 96,000 words plus words in NaNoWriMo in 28 days. You're like a machine, Bee. And so I think that like ultimately what you'll do, Bee, is you'll have a section at the top of your query that's going to be the title of your book. You're going to have that it's an anthology of fantasy short stories, all written by you. You're going to have the total word count. You might even want to slip in like it's 100,000 words over the course of 6 stories, right? So you give those details. And if you can find a comp for the, I don't know, Alisa, do you think it would be another short story anthology for fantasy would be a comp, or do you think it's more thematic than that?
Yeah, I think I would stick more to vibes and themes.
Yeah.
They're not, I mean, there's a lot of anthologies out there, but it also might be kind of hard to find them. So yeah, I think looking kind of more umbrella comp.
Knowing Bee, I think she could probably do one of these, like the Ziggy Stardust has a baby with the, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and then they get drunk and sing karaoke all night. Like I can see Bee coming up with some crazy comp, right? That combines like her story with some, I don't know, song or band or movie or something, and like she puts it together in some crazy way. Like that's, I'm going to challenge her to do it.
And there is a small press, which I have on my list for us to talk about next week, called Dragon Bone Publishing. They're actually open right now, but they want stuff that pushes the genre. Like specifically, they want stuff, fantasy, that maybe isn't anything like what you've seen before. And I feel like this could be a really, and I think they've published an anthology as well. So Dragon Bone Publishing, keep that in mind. So, I mean, they're out there. You have to search for them, but especially when you want kind of a unique perspective on something, I think a small press is probably
a good way to go. Yeah, because they really niche down hard, some of those small presses.
Yeah.
So, and there's tons of them for fantasy. So, like, if you're writing fantasy and looking for a small press, I feel like you're in luck. You get the pick of the litter. But so I would put the details here. I would put, the title, I'd put all that. Then I would go into the section where it's like, maybe these two paragraphs, you kind of weave them together. You kind of harp on the theme, you harp on the narrator. And then I would move what you have up here, take some of the, maybe the pick and choose some of it and combine it with this bottom piece here, because you've got a lot of really good credentials down here as well that I think would help. And so now let's see if we can take some questions. I know I did see that Stacy had a question. If anybody else here has a question, feel free to stick it in the chat. We're going to start with this one. So Stacy wants to know, is a query letter an email or an attached doc? So typically there are two different ways that you're going to query an agent, and you will find that information usually on their website. And some agents take queries via email. And so generally what you would do is write an email that says, dear agent's name, and then you would copy and paste your query letter into the body of the email. Now from there, you have to follow their instructions. And that's part of what makes this so utterly freaking just frustrating, is everybody's got a different way of doing it, a different thing they want, and they want you to do it a different way. So you have to read the submissions page very closely, because some will say, copy and paste your first 10 pages into the body of your email. Some will say, I want you to attach the first 5 pages as a Word doc or a PDF. Some people will say, we don't open attachments. Some people will say, like, if you don't make the subject line say these exact words, like they have some sort of automation that will kick it out. So the submissions page is going to have all of your sort of like the T's that you have to cross and the I's that you have to dot are all in the submissions page. But for the most part, if you're emailing, you copy and paste the query letter into the body of the email, and then from there you follow the rest of the instructions as far as sample pages and synopsis. There's also a thing called Query Manager. And so if you actually go back and look at the repay for my class last Friday, I think it was, I think at one point I show you a Query Manager and what it looks like. So the Query Manager is more of a form where they will ask for different parts of your query, like you're just filling out an online form. So it'll ask for your title, it'll ask for your genre. Usually it's you choose the genre from a drop-down list, and if you don't see your genre in the drop-down list, that agent doesn't take your genre. It'll ask how long your book is, but then they also ask for your query letter. And so you will copy and paste your query letter into the form and then go from there. So that's probably more complicated of an answer than you were expecting, but I'm not leaving anything out, right? Like those are really the only two ways.
Those are the main ones. I've run across a very small number of agencies that have their own form on the agency page. So that's even more, just different. Query Tracker has added a new feature that will copy content from a previous submission into the one that you're working on, which is a great time saver, but you got to make doubly sure that you have checked.
I don't use it because
I haven't used it either.
It filled it all out for me once, and then I realized that it did not, some of the things that it auto populated did not apply. And so on Query Manager, you can also click, and before you start to fill in, it'll show you all the things you filled out for that piece before anyway. And so I just clicked the one that applies.
And it's not too bad because like the different segments they want are already in your query letter. So you're just copying and pasting out of that. I mostly appreciate Query Tracker because you know exactly who you've submitted to. You get a confirmation. Sometimes the emails seem like they go into a black hole. So I do like that. The majority of agents that I've come across are using Query Tracker, Query Manager, and there's still some doing the email thing. So I think you're likely to find both. The form on the website is very rare.
If you are sending an email query, and I think Boomerang is not the only one like this out there, and I think you have to pay for Boomerang. Maybe there's free ones. Put a read receipt on it. If you can put a read receipt on your email, then you know somebody on the other end opened it. And that has like, let me breathe a little easier too, knowing that somebody actually got it on the other side and I didn't just throw it into the void and it was never opened. Plus, if I can see that it was never opened, I feel less guilty about sending the nudge, I think. And so I actually generally just don't even send a nudge at all. I'm like, they must not like me. And then I move on. But
answer in 6 to 8 weeks. I mean, I got a manuscript request from a query I'd submitted 5 months prior. So, you know, you just have to be able to close that door and move to the next person because, you know, you're not always going to get a response. A lot of the email submissions do have an autoresponder, at least not all of them. Some of them you'll at least get a ping back that says, okay, it actually landed in the correct inbox for that person.
So Jane wants to know, would it be helpful to add subtitles like jacket copy and bio to help identify what's what? You do not need it.
Nope.
They know what they're looking for. And there's, you know, as much as I hate to say it, because you guys know I don't like being like everyone else. I am totally like one of those hipster Kramers that I'm like, no, if everybody else is going left, I'm going right, you know. But this is one of those places where you just do what they say and make it look like everybody else's, because when you do something weird and offbeat and you think it's going to get their attention, a lot of times it just actually annoys them, right? So like, I wouldn't worry about it. Don't subtitle anything. Just follow like a normal query outline. Like we said, like people put things in different orders. And sometimes like, I don't know, the way you've written it or your voice or whatever might kind of lend itself to one structure or another. Like, you know, what are you putting at the top? What are you putting at the bottom? But I really am leaning these days towards putting the details at the top, the personalization right there, make it short and sweet. Put the jacket copy in, because like what these couple of agents that I've done their classes lately have said is they read that top part to see what the details are. They will skim to find the information that they want if they don't see it at the top, so you don't have to worry about it, you know, but the meat of your letter is really going to be that jacket copy. So let's see, what do we have down here? Does anybody else?
Question: Query Tracker versus Query Manager. So Query Tracker is the writer side, Query Manager is the agent side. So when the agent comes to look at it, it's Query Manager. When you go to submit, it's Query Tracker. And it's free. You can also pay, it's a $25 annual subscription, gives you a little bit more data. You could definitely go down the rabbit hole of analyzing agent data, so be aware. But you can do everything you need to do without paying a subscription fee as well. If you want more, you can kind of see a list of kind of where you are in the stack. Have they made decisions about the ones before or after you? That's the $25, like I said, annual. So it is definitely still accessible. They will send you emails weekly of like who are new agents that have opened up or genres have changed. So definitely use it, at least the free version, and get a good sense of it.
Yeah. Actually, I've thought about doing a whole workshop just on Query Tracker to show how
Yeah.
you can use it, because you can use it to track all your queries, even if the agent is not on Query Tracker. I think there's a way you can add in your own information. I actually don't use it to track my queries. I only use it to spy on my queries and to also, before I, this is going to sound terrible, before I query an agent, I will look at their query tracker stats and see how quickly they respond. Because sometimes if I can see that they're one of those that never responds and it's crickets, I have purposefully not queried those people before.
Yeah, the only
Like,
caveat I would give to that is if they're an email submission, but they're on
yep.
Query Tracker, they might not be updating their Query Tracker.
Yeah.
So, but if they're using the Query Tracker Query Manager on their side stuff and there's nothing, then yeah, that's definitely a red flag.
Yeah. I mean, that's like so like, I don't know why I feel so terrible saying that, but I do. So, okay, B has a question. Should I put the total word count for all of the books? Okay, so I think you mean for the short stories, right? So if let's say you have 6 short stories for your anthology, and the total word count for all 6 of those stories is 90,000 words. I would put 90,000 words over the course of 6 short stories. I wouldn't break it down per story. I would just give the total one. I think you wrote books, but you mean stories. So I think that's what you would do. You haven't written them all yet. Do not query this until they are all written. So it used to be many years ago, before self-publishing broke the industry, right? You could take an idea, you could take a couple sample chapters, you could write a query letter, you could send it off to an agent. An agent would say, I love this, I'll help you write it. Or, I love this, I'll sign you, and let's get it into an editor's hands. And then you would have time to write the book. Gone are the days where that's a thing. So at this point, agents don't want stuff in their inbox if it's not complete. So wait until it's all done. Figure out the total word count. I would also put the number of short stories in there. I think Alisa was correct. Put the word anthology in there, and then go from there. So that way, if you might end up having like 16 dragons roar to mind. I don't know. So I think that's great. Okay, so did that get us to the end? I think that got us to the end of our questions. Oh my gosh, we went 1 hour and 42 minutes. Call me Doug. I was like, whoo, I thought this would take an hour and we'd blow through those, but we didn't. So anyway,
you start drilling down, it always takes more time. It's good. Like, I love talking about this stuff, but it always takes longer than you think.
Well, shameless plug. If you enjoyed this, come back next week, next Friday, same bat time, same bat channel, same bat ladies. And we are going to walk you through the process of pitching a small press. And so anyway, thank you guys for joining us today. And we will see you in the community. Bye, everybody.